So good morning. Today's daf is Yevamot daf Lamed Aleph. We are near the bottom of Lamed Mabed, about 6 lines up, second to last word on the line. Let me share my screen. Yesterday, we learned a Mishnah that introduced the concept of uncertainty regarding marriage and divorce. And that'll be the topic basically of our entire day. And we dealt with an uncertain marriage or divorce for an erva. So we'll call her Rachel. And again, Rachel will be married to Reuven. And so Rachel has some relationship, one of the 15 kinds of relationship that we learned in the first Mishnah of our Masechet. So, for example, maybe Rachel is Reuven's niece, is the daughter of his brother Shimon. But in any event, the point is that Shimon has a relationship that if, in fact, Reuven were to marry Rachel, then the result is that both Rachel and Reuven's other wife, Shira, would both go free without actually going through Yibum or Chalitza, because as we learned in our first Mishnah in Maseches Yevamos, if a brother, if let's say, again, Reuven and Shimon are brothers, Reuven marries Shimon's daughter Rachel and Shira, and now Reuven dies without children because Shimon, of course, cannot marry his daughter. So as a result, not only can he not perform Yibum or Chalitza with her, but he cannot even perform Yibum or Chalitza with Reuven's co-wife, with the co-wife of Rachel, Shira. So now the question, though, is, right, and the topic that we're discussing and that we raised in yesterday's Mishnah at the end of the day, is what about if we're uncertain about the nature of the marriage? And there could be 2 reasons that we can be uncertain about the nature of the marriage. We could be uncertain of the nature of the marriage because at the moment that the marriage was started, when Reuven married Rachel, he did so in an uncertain way. And we said that what is that? That's if you were to throw the Kedushin to the woman, the answer is that we're talking about throwing the Kedushin to the woman in Rishus Harabim. And so what matters is it closer to him or is it closer to her? And if we're unsure about it, so then that would be a case of uncertain marriage. Now, and then what's the case of uncertain divorce? Well, instead of picking up the same kind of case of what happens if you throw the divorce decree in public, we say if the husband wrote a divorce, but it lacked witnesses, or there were witnesses, but it lacked a date, or it had a date, but only one witness. So Rashi notes in that case, all of these cases are valid b'di'evit, meaning if John and Jane are married, and John writes one of these divorces that has this issue, and then, notwithstanding the fact that we say that it's not a valid divorce, if Jane were to then go and marry Jim, and Jim and Jane were to have children, those children would not be mamzerim, because we will say that b'di'evit, we will say that this get is sufficient.
And that means that we also won't force them to get divorced, her and her second husband. Maybe? I'm not sure.
I presume so, but I'm not 100% sure. Okay, I presume so. I presume that that's correct. Hopefully we'll see that when we get to Maseches Gittin. Okay. So now the Gemara asked, why didn't we talk about a case of throwing a get? So the Gemara is going to offer, just like we talked about it, throwing a Kedushin. And the Gemara is going to offer 3 answers. The first answer is offered by Rabbah, then we'll offer an answer by Abaye, and finally we'll offer an answer by Rava. And so Rabbah, Abaye, and then Rava. And so we're going to end up rejecting Abaye's answer, but where are we in the answer at the moment? So at the moment, Rabbah answered that that the issue is the following, and that here's the distinction. When we're talking about marriage, so then we're going to be strict, and we're going to say that you need chalitza, because so we're going to try to explain it in the course of this morning, why we're going to be strict with respect to when you do kiddushin, but if it and so therefore in a case of throwing the get, we will be strict, but we would not have been strict in a case of throwing the get. And so as a result, when it comes to throwing the divorce, we would not have been strict. And so then Gemara is now going to ask, I don't understand, why would you say that that's be strict in one situation, but not in the other? And in addition, the stringency that you're saying seems to lend itself to a potential leniency. So that's where we're up to. So high chumrah, this chumrah of saying that we're going to be strict in the case of an uncertain kiddushin, da'asili de kulahu. Again, we are now in the fifth to last line on Lamed Amud Bet. So why will it lead to an improper leniency? Zimnin da'azalhu makadish lala achosa kiddushay vadai. What happens if now, after Ruvain did an uncertain marriage with Rachel, now he does a certain marriage with Leah? Well, what's the problem with that? Well, the problem is the following. If in fact we say that we're treating the marriage to Rachel as a valid marriage, well, now all of a sudden that marriage to Leah never took hold. And so as a result, he may think that because we're being strict with respect to the marriage of Rachel, he may now think that, oh, it must be that what I did with Leah didn't matter at all. Or Vinami Zimrin da Asa Achar Makadish Lalida Kedushe Vandai. Or what happens again? Ruvain did an uncertain marriage with Rachel, and now John Doe does a valid marriage to Rachel. So again, if we are treating this B'chevan da Asar law Mar Litzara Liyabume, and since you're prohibiting her co-wife to be taken in Yibum, Amri, people are going to say, Dekama Kiddushin, that the first marriage must have been a good marriage. Ubasrai Lav Kiddushin, and they'll say that the second marriage was not a good Kiddushin. And so as a result, even though it was totally valid, even though there was no uncertainty associated with it. So as a result, we're going to undermine a good Kiddushin when in fact that good Kiddushin actually needs to be respected. And now we turn to Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph and say, Kaven to come at Sarchat Chalitza Mida Yadi de Chumra Ba'almahu. No, because people are being required to do Chalitza, meaning that you're not going to be allowed to do Yibum, so people will know that this is just a Chumra, and it is not, in fact, a basis to say that the marriage was good. Well, Ihaki, Gerushin Nami listening. Well, why not just do the exact same thing with Gerushin, with divorce? Litzrucha Chalitza, and require Chalitza. Who made the Yadi de Chumra Ba'almahu, and people will realize that it's just a Chumra. Well, Im Ata Omer Choletzis Misyabemes. Well, the issue is that when it comes to the get, if we allow the get, if we try to be quote unquote machmir by the get, and say again, here we have Ruvain divorcing Rachel, who is a erva to Shimon, and now that he divorced her, if Ruvain were to die, Shimon will be able to do Yibum with Ruvain's other wife, Shira. So but now we're uncertain about it. So why not say in that uncertainty case that we're going to require chalitza? So the hachanami, so the point is that if we say that there's chalitza, maybe the woman will end up having yibum done to her. When it comes to kedushin, also we could say that we're concerned that the surviving brother will end up doing yibum, thinking that it's okay. Well, but this yavim aim b'kach. You know what? When it comes to the marriage, since our real view is that the marriage is not a good marriage and the woman stays in her original status, well, her original status, Rachel's original status, is unmarried, and therefore Shimon is able to do yibum with Shira. But on the other hand, when it comes to but on the other hand, when it comes to the divorce case, we have a bigger problem, because in the divorce case, when we're uncertain about the divorce and we say that she stays in her chazaka position, well, that her chazaka position, Rachel's chazaka position, is being married to Ruvain. And if Rachel is actually married to Ruvain, then there's no yibum or chalitza at all. And so if Shimon ends up doing yibum because we require chalitza, that would be a very big problem. So therefore, we've come up with an explanation. We've answered all the problems so far, and now Abaye asks a question. Abaye challenges Rabbah from a Mishnah that we'll learn in about another month. Yes.
I just want to make sure I understand what's happening, because it seems that this answer that we had from Rabbah doesn't make a lot of sense. If we said that the suffix get in the Mishnah is really a real get b'di'evet.
Yes.
So what we're saying is for a real suffix, we have
for a real. So let me say it. So for a real suffix, if we have a real suffix, then we're going to treat her as if she's still married, and so as a result, there would be no yibum and no chalitza.
Wait, what?
Yes, we're going to treat her as, meaning the case that we're not talking about, right? So according to Rabbah, the case that we're not talking about in the Mishnah is why didn't we? Let's remember the question. The question is, why didn't we say in the Mishnah the case of throwing a get? And Rabbah's answer is that because in the case of throwing a get, we're going to treat Rachel as still married. And so as a result, there is no yibum. There is no chalitza.
Wait a minute.
Right. That's because, yes, exactly. L'shuk omedet, meaning that there's no, right, the Shira was going to go free. She was not going to have any chalitza. She was not going to have any yibum done to her. She could marry whomever she wanted without waiting. So she remains in her chezka situation because of the marriage to Rachel remains valid. And so that's why. So again, so Rabbah is saying that again, the reason that we don't mention the throwing of the get case is because the throwing of the get case is not going to result in the mandatory chalitza. Indeed, it requires nothing. The woman goes scot-free, namely Shira goes scot-free. So that's why, so that was the answer. So that's again, answer number one, according to Rabbah. And now Abaye asks a question from we're going to deflect this challenge, but then Abaye is going to have another challenge there's going to be another challenge that will be successful. So Abaye, Nafal Abayis Allah Ba'al Bas Achiv. Now, we're going to talk about the following case. A man is married both to his niece, Dina, and to Shira. The issue is that now a house is going to collapse on him and Dina. And so the problem is that the problem is that we don't know who died first. Now, if Dina died first, well, then Shimon could do Yibum with Rachel because, Rachel is no longer a co-wife of his daughter Dinah. And so as a result, that's fine. But if Reuven died first, well, then Rachel goes out without Chalitza and without Yibum because she's a co-wife of Shimon's daughter. So now, due to this uncertainty, we say that Rachel requires Chalitza. So Abai is going to ask, so let's do the case inside. So Novel Abai a house falls on Reuben and his niece Dinah, to whom she's married. And we don't know who died first. We require Chalitza. Well, Amai, Hachanami, Nema Isha Zo Bechezkas Heter Lashukometis. Let's say that she should stay in her quality at the beginning. What was her quality, her condition before the house fell? Before the house fell, she was Rachel would have gone free. So Umi Suffolk, the Shira would have gone free. Umi Suffolk Ataba. Rachel would have gone free in the example. So Rachel is not the relative, and Dinah is the daughter of Shimon. So Rachel would have gone free. Umisafek atabala osra, and now due to the uncertainty of the house falling, we don't know who died first. We're going to prohibit her. Well, al tasran misafek. You say that you're not supposed to prohibit her because of a suffix. And if you say, oh, okay, well, we're going to prohibit her only because we're going to be strict. Well, it's a stringency that's going to result in a improper leniency. Because again, if you require chalitza, then maybe somebody might actually come and perform yibum. So two answers. So Gerishin Deshchichi Gazru Bahu Rabbanan. So maybe when it comes to divorce, where people get divorced on a regular basis, and so we need to be strict about an uncertain case. So therefore, they're not going to have we're not going to require chalitza because it might lead to yibum. But Mapolis, but when it came to a collapsing house where it's not a particularly likely thing to cause, so the rabbi said, go ahead and do chalitza. We're not worried that chalitza is going to result to yibum. So inami, or alternatively, gerishin dekaima erva dekama mochach, that when it comes to divorce, where the erva is in front of us, which shows that at the moment she's still a co-wife and everybody, and it's obvious to everyone. Well, but sarasa kama tzrachat lachalitza. If you require the co-wife to go through chalitza, amre, people will say, kamu be'rabanan begita degita ma'al. It must have been a good get, and that will result ba'asule bume l'tzara, and then people will say, oh, if it was a good get, go ahead and perform yibum. But mapolet, when it comes to the collapsed house, mikamu bahu rabbana b'mapolet, is there any way that the rabbis could come to a conclusion about who died first? No, it's clear that it's an uncertain case. So as a result, we're going to not be worried about chalitza leading to yibum in that case, because people will understand that the chalitza that exists is only because of the uncertainty and not because maybe the rabbis decided that in fact it was a valid divorce or a valid or that the rabbis decided that she died first.
Wait a minute. On the first thing that we saw when we said was that the answer?
Yes, that's answer number one. It's a double answer. When it comes to Gerishin, we say that the rabbis are worried that because it's common, people may think that if you require chalitza, then yibum is allowed. But because it's uncommon, because collapsing houses are uncommon.
Is gazru lo lahachmir?
Lo lahachmir, correct. That's exactly right. Okay. So but now we have another question, and this question is going to finally knock out Rabba's answer. Well, one second, but Gabi Gerishin Milo Tnan, don't we have a teaching with respect to uncertainty in divorce that we say it applies with respect to chalitza. V'hatanan, we learned in a Mishnah, and this is a Mishnah in Gittin. Haisa omedes b'rishus harabim. If the woman is standing in rishus harabim, uzrako la, and the man throws the get to her, well then karov la migoreshes. If it ends up closer to her, she's divorced. Karov lo ain't a migoreshes. If it lands closer to him, they're not divorced. Matzah al matzah, if it's 50-50, if you can't tell, migoreshes ve'ain migoreshes. We treat her as divorced and not divorced. So I'm reading Lamai Helfasa, and what category do we say that this applies to? Well, the e Kohen who asurale, that if in fact the husband was a Kohen, he can't remarry her because she's considered divorced. The erva, and if she is a erva to one of the other brothers, he tzarasa by a chalitza. Now his if the husband were to die, the co-wife, who might not be a co-wife because the woman might now be divorced, but we're not sure, is going to require chalitza. So the lomer omrinan she'im ata omer choletzes misya bemes, and we don't actually say that. Oh, let's be worried about if he takes her in, if he does chalitza, maybe he'll also end up doing yibum. So the Gemara answers. So ha itmar Allah Rabba v'Rav Yosef to Amri Tarbayu hacha b'shteva kite edim askinan. That we're talking here about two sets of witnesses. Achas omeres karov la, v'achas omeres karov lo. We have two sets of witnesses. And therefore, what we have here is maybe it's a valid biblical get, and maybe it's not a valid biblical get. But when it comes to our Mishnah, bivas achas, we're talking about bekas achas. We're talking about one single set of witnesses, and Rashi explains that when we say one set of witnesses, what we mean is one witness in each direction. One witness says that the get fell closer to her, and one witness that says that the get fell closer to him. And again, we're not obviously talking about our Mishnah. Our Mishnah did not, in fact, discuss this case. But if it were to have discussed the case of the get, it would have been a case of one witness in either direction.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do you know that our Mishnah? I'm sorry, Umas Nisin. I'm sorry, I apologize. Umas Nisin dehacha bekas achas dehavale sveika derabanan. But when it came to our Mishnah, it was dealing with one set of witnesses, and that would have been a suffix derabanan. And so, as a result, the suffix derabanan we're going to be lahakel, and suffix deoraisa we're going to be lahachmer. We're going to be strict with respect to the biblical uncertainty and lenient with respect to the rabbinic uncertainty. You have a question?
Why is one of them? What's the difference that makes one suffix deoraisa and suffix
The fact that there are two valid witnesses. So the fact that there are two valid witnesses shows that it's a good, that according to at least one set of those two valid witnesses, it's a good get, and it's a good get from the Torah. Whereas when you have only one witness in either direction, it is not valid according to the Torah in either direction. So as a result, that's why it's only a suffix d'Rabbanan. At least that's our understanding at the moment. We are going to reject this in the end. Okay. So well, how do you know that our Mishnah, if it would have talked about the case of a divorce, it would have talked about a case of if it would have talked about the case of a thrown divorce, it would be talking about a case where there was one witness in each direction. Maybe it's talking about two witnesses in each direction. Well, dumya de kedushin. It's just like the case of the kedushin. Ma kedushin b'chas achas, af gerushin b'chas achas. So just as when we came to the throwing of the kedushin, we're talking about one witness in either direction. So too, we're talking about one witness in either direction with respect to a divorce. Well, one second, the kedushin gufayo mimayda b'chas achas. How do you know that we're talking about only one set of witnesses with one witness in each direction when it comes to the kedushin? Dilma v'shteichi te'edim. Maybe we're talking about two witnesses. Well, ib'shteichi te'edim tisyabim ve'ein b'kach klum. Well, one second. If in fact there were two sets of witnesses, one in either direction, well then then the marriage to let the then tisyabim the aim bekaklum, that she should be able to be taken in the other wife, the Shira, should be able to be taken in Yibum because the marriage to the Erva is not valid. Well, 1 second. Kaime Edim Vikamri Karov Law. 1 second. You're going to say that there are 2 other witnesses. You're saying that there are 2 witnesses that say that it's closer to him, and therefore we're going to say that it's totally fine for her to for Yibum to happen. Well, 1 second. There are 2 witnesses that says that the Kedushin was closer to her. How can you possibly say that that it would be fine for Shira to be taken in Yibum? And that there would be nothing wrong with that. Moreover, moreover, your whole supposition, the supposition that was constructed by quoting Rabbah and Rav Yosef is mistaken, even in the case of 2 witnesses where it's a rabbinic uncertainty, not a biblical uncertainty. The Amri Oki Trey Levahade Trey, because we say these 2 witnesses go against those 2 witnesses and they eliminate each other. The Isha Okma Achazuka, and we say that the woman ends up staying in her certain status. So as a result, your answer of differentiating one case of involving 2 witnesses in both directions and one case involving 1 witness in each direction doesn't work. And so as a result, your entire answer falls apart. And midi dahavi anichse de bar shatya. There's a guy bar shatya that the Gemara talks about elsewhere in Ksuvos that is considered crazy. Well, sometimes he's crazy and sometimes he's not. Sometimes he has temporary bouts of insanity. And so the bar shatya zubin nichse, and we have a fellow, he sold some property. So asube treba amrid kishahu chalim Zubin, and some people say that when he was totally normal, he made the sale. And other 2 say that he was totally crazy when he made the sale. We put one set against the other. And we end up saying that the land stays in the possession of Bar Shatya. He did not, in fact, sell anything because we say that the things stay where they are as we turn to Lamed Aleph on Bet. And so as a result, we are stuck. We were unable. So again, what questions were we unable to answer? We were unable to answer the fact that why Gittin should be treated differently than Kedushin. And so as a result, because we in fact had a case where even by Gittin, by a thrown get, we were also requiring Chalitza. And so again, our question goes back all the way to the beginning. Why didn't our Mishnah reference throwing the get instead of the cases that it did reference? Instead of the case of 1 witness or a witness or 2 witnesses with no time, or a handwritten with no witnesses, or 1 witness and the time. So all these possibilities, why did it mention those? Why didn't it just say if the get was thrown and we're unsure whether it was closer to him or closer to her? So Ella Amar Abaye, so Abaye offers another answer. Yagida love Reyu. One item will tell you about its friend. So the idea is that we already taught the uncertainty of a Kedushin case. And so as a result, Tana b'Kedushin v'huadin l'gerishin. The answer is that actually the Mishnah could have said the case of the throwing of the get. But why didn't it? Because it already told us the case of the throwing of the Kedushin. So why bother telling us about a new case? It already told us about the relevant case. So Amrle Rava, Rava asks now a question on Abaye's answer. Iyagid alav reyu, my zehu de katani. When in our Mishnah, we said the word zehu twice. In fact, we said 2 phrases. We said zehu suffix Kedushin and zehu suffix Gittin. So 1 second, if that's true, that we said zehu suffix Kedushin and zehu suffix Gittin, it appears that we were saying that only these cases are the cases of suffix kedushin, and only these cases are the cases of suffix gittin. So how do you understand that? So again, we've now rejected answer number 2 of Abaye. So Ella Amarava kol sheyesh b'kedushin yesh b'gerushin v'yesh b'gerushin masha ein b'kedushin. That what the situation is as follows: that if you have something that is true for kedushin, it will also be true for gerushin. So in fact, when we say the throw the kedushin case, we could have said the throw the gittin case. However, when it says what we say with respect to divorce, when we talk about the written contract with no witnesses, or the contract with 2 witnesses but no date, or the contract with a date and 1 witness, when we deal with those cases do not apply back to kedushin. The zehu de gerushin lavdaka. And so as a result, when it says zehu with respect to gerushin, it isn't really being precise. The language isn't precise. So why did we use such imprecise language? Elamashum de tana zehu b'kedushin, because we used the word zehu when it came to kedushin, and there we were being precise, because the suffix kedushin case is only the case of the throwing of the kedushin, and not the cases that were the examples in the Mishnah with respect to the get. And so as a result, if you were to write the kedushin document and not have any witnesses on it, or if you were to write the document and have 2 witnesses and no date, or you were to write the document and have the date and 1 witness, in all those cases, we would actually say that that is not a suffix kedushin case. Indeed, I think we would say that it's a valid kedushin case. But in any event, the bottom line is that we don't apply those uncertainties to the case of kedushin. So, but since we learned the zehu by kedushin, tananami zehu b'gerushin. So since the zehu by gerushin, we also do that as well. The zehu de kedushin lemuute mai lemuute zman deleka b'kedushin. Oh, I'm sorry. So the main thing that it's coming to exclude is a document that doesn't have a date. That in fact we do not require a date in a kedushin. So the case of the witnesses without a date, that exists as a suffix gerushin, but from a perspective of kedushin, it's not a suffix kedushin, it's a totally valid kedushin. So name ma. So again, so the only one that is excluded from the kedushin is that first case of where there are witnesses but no date. So now the Gemara is going to ask, and the rest of our Gemara today is going to talk about the topic of why don't we need a date in kedushin. So lo tiknu zman b'kedushin. Why don't we need a date in kedushin? So now, in order to talk about this, we need to know the following debate, because and the debate exists with respect to gittin, and that is, why do we need a date with respect to gittin? So in gittin, there's a debate. Reish Lakish says that the reason that we need a date in a get is because we need to specify the time when the husband loses his rights in the fruit produced by the wife's property. So again, if a wife brings real estate to a marriage, the husband during the time of the marriage gets the benefits of the fruit associated with that property. As soon as they get divorced, those rights go away and she gets her property back. So in order for us to know when is it that if the man took the fruit, he's actually stealing from his wife, we use a date in the divorce document. That's the answer of Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan gives another answer to why we need a date in a divorce document. And he gives the following example. Let's say a man, Reuven, is married to his niece, Dinah. So the marriage doesn't work out, but at the same time, he still loves Dinah. Now, it turns out that Dinah had an adulterous relationship, and there were witnesses. Well, if in fact there is no date required on a divorce document, what is Ruvain going to do? Ruvain is going to write a divorce document with no date on it and say that that document happened before Dinah had her adulterous relationship, and therefore saved Dinah from the death by the Beit Din. But now, by requiring a date on the document, there is not going to be that possibility. And so as a result, if we'll be able to know whether or not, in fact, Dinah's sin of adultery or relation, her affair with another man, was it adulterous or was it not? Because we'll be able to look at the date on the divorce and determine whether or not it's that's the problem. So that's the reason why we have a date on the divorce document. And now we're going to discuss whether any of those reasons would apply to Kedushin. Okay, so so why didn't we apply a date to Kedushin as well? So it makes sense if you say, according to Reish Lakish, that what we're talking about is the fruit. So arusa leis lapera. When you become just the Kedushin, that doesn't get you anything. That you need to actually go through the second stage. Remember, Kedushin is just the first stage of marriage. The second stage is Nisuin. And without that, you don't get, until you have Nisuin, you don't get the fruit. So therefore, who cares what the date is? So but if you're worried about whether or not your daughter has it, your wife, who's also your niece, has an affair and is now going to potentially be killed by the court, litakin zman, we should actually put a time into the document, because that way we'll know whether or not they were married at that time. So mishum deika to mekadesh bekaspa deika to mekadesh b'shtar. Well, remember that there are multiple ways to marry someone. You can marry them with a contract, but you can also marry them with just plain money. And so, because when you marry somebody with just plain money, and that's effectively what we do, right? We marry with a ring, and the ring is considered a value. And so we marry with a value. Well, when you marry with a value, now there are people who engrave their rings, but in general, we try to not have any kind of markings on the ring, and we have a very simple ring in order to do that, although it's probably fine even if you have a marking, as long as you don't have a stone. But in any event, the point is because that doesn't have the date on it, lo takan rabbanan zman. So as a result, they didn't bother to tell you that when you get divorced, in the few instances when you get married, in the few instances with a contract, we're not going to bother to tell you to put a date on it, because in most instances, you don't have to bother with a date because you get married with money, which doesn't have a date on it. So Amrle Rav Acha Breda Rav Yosef Lo Rav Ashi, well, Abda the Ika de Kane Bekaspa the Ika de Bishtara the Takan Rabbanan Zman. So when it came to a slave, Abda, when it comes to a slave, there where you can acquire a slave with money, or you can acquire a slave with documents. This is the way Rashi understands it, that we're talking about buying a contract to buy a slave. There, the Takan Rabbanan Zman, the rabbis say you do need to put the time in. So what's the difference? Why buy a slave do we require a contract, even though you can also buy a slave with money? Well, Hassam, Ruba B'Shtara. Well, there, most of the slave purchases are happening with a contract. But when it comes to marrying, most people are married with money. And so as a result, we're not going to have a decree for the situation, for the rare situation. So the Ibayasema, now we have an alternative answer to this question. So again, answer number one to why no date for Kedushin is because most people get married with money, and money doesn't require a date. And so as a result, we're not going to require a date by by contract either. Well, and now answer number 2, mishum delo efshar, because you can't, because what are you going to do in order to try and prevent the death of the daughter? So even if you were to try to prevent the death of the daughter, what are you going to do? So I'm sorry, how are you going to try and prevent a cover-up as a result of date? If you leave the contract with her, with the wife, she's just going to erase the date if it's going to be a problem. And as a result, since she'll erase the date, it will be as if she just was never married, and therefore that we're not going to solve the problem. Meaning, if we have the date on the Kedushin contract, what are we going to do with that contract? If we leave it with her, she'll just erase the date. So linacha, but linacha gabi didei. If we leave it with him, well, zimnin debasachoso he umachapa Allah. So maybe he's going to be worried about the date, and he's going to be worried about the fact that he doesn't want his niece to be subject to the death penalty for having an adulterous affair, so he'll erase it. So that's not a fix either. Lincha gabi edim. Let's finish this. So leave the Kedushin contract with witnesses. Well, if the witnesses remember when they got married, we don't need the contract. The contract doesn't help us. And if the witnesses don't remember when they got married, zimnin dechazu miksava ba'asu misade. They may look at the contract, see the date, and use that date to remember and then testify. And there is a rule that you cannot, unlike in actual courts where there's actually a permitted, you're allowed to use other things to refresh people's recollections. Here, you're not allowed, and although maybe you might not be able to give the person the actual date, a contract with the date on it to refresh the recollection. But in any event, you can't, in Jewish law, you can't show the person the date and then say, oh, well, now do you remember? Because that would be their testifying from the document and not their actual testifying from their mouths. Okay, so now you had a question?
What do we mean lincha gabe dida or didei?
Like that, we have a written contract that says that the two people are married, and it has a date on it. That this is our supposition. This is like the straw man. We're creating a straw man we're going to strike down. We say, okay, let's assume that you can have a Kedushin document with a date on it. What are you going to do with the document now that it's been given and that they're married? Who's going to hold that document? If you have her hold the document, the problem is that if she wants to have an affair, she'll erase the date and have the affair, and we won't know whether or not she was married.
My main question is, like, what's the havamina that someone else would be holding the document? Like,
as opposed to who?
As in, he gives her the document. Why would we say, oh, then?
Well, we're beginning with her keeping the document. That's exactly right. But then we show that won't help. What are we trying to do with the date on the document? We're trying to say that the date on the document will help us clarify whether there was an affair or not. So whether there was a prohibited affair or not.
And then what we're essentially saying is, so if we're going to institute a gzera, you might think institute the gzera to write the date and institute that she needs to give it back to him.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Exactly. That's exactly right. So, but first, before we get to her giving it back to him, we start with her keeping it, right? So let her keep it, and that way we'll know whether or not they what they did. But no, we won't know what they did because she'll erase it. So she'll go back to her chazakah of being unmarried, and so as a result, we won't know when exactly she got married. She'll say that she had the affair before she got married, and we won't be able to kill her. And then if we leave it with him, well, maybe he's going to care enough about her that he will also help her by erasing the date. And if we leave it with the witnesses, well, then the witnesses, they can either remember the date, in which case we don't need the document, or they can remember the date, in which case they may end up coming to use the document to testify. And then, in fact, that will be a bad testimony and that will cause a problem. So we can't leave it anywhere. So as a result, ihachi, the Gerishanami Nemahachi. Well, why don't we say all these problems with respect to the divorce? So the answer is no. With respect to the divorce, we don't have those problems because Hasam Lahatzola Didakasi. In the case of the divorce, the date helps her, right? If she erases the date, then the divorce is not valid, and it doesn't help her. And if she keeps the date, well, the date tells us the truth. So there's no incentive for her to erase the date, because either she's married because the date tells us that she was still married, or if she erases the date on the divorce decree, the divorce is invalid and she's still married. So either way, there's no incentive for her to erase the date. Of course, if the date is helpful for her, she won't erase the date. So as a result, the date will not be erased by anybody, because the divorce decree can only help her survive the fact that she had a potential affair. So haka l'chova didakasi. But now, with respect to the marriage document only comes to hurt her, because if it's a valid marriage, it doesn't make a difference then the date on the marriage can only end up hurting her, because if we erase the marriage, then she's not married any longer, and the affair is legal. So as a result, when it comes to the divorce decree, there's no incentive to change the date. But when it comes to the marriage decree, there's tremendous incentive to erase the date. So as a result, there's no point to having the debate when it comes to the marriage. But when it comes to the divorce, there's a great point to having the date. Because again, if in fact she was married at the time of the divorce, she was married, the date on the divorce is after her affair, she's stuck, because she can't erase it, and she can't and the date shows that she was married. Because if she erases it, the divorce isn't a valid divorce, and so she would be married and she'd be killed because she had an affair. So there's no change in the world. And if in fact her affair was after the date on the divorce, well, then she's golden. She's not going to erase it, because if she erases it, she ends up getting killed, because she ends up saying that she was married. So there's never an incentive for her to erase the date on the divorce decree. Whereas on the Kedushin, there is a great incentive for her to erase the date. Anytime that her affair was after the date on the Kedushin, she'll want to erase the date on the Kedushin. And so as a result, there's no point in having a date on the Kedushin. So what we've seen is that there's a great point to having a date on the divorce, and saying that it's required for a divorce. Whereas when it comes to Kedushin, there's no point of having the date on the Kedushin. And so as a result, we don't need to have the date on Kedushin.
But wait a minute, for a shtar gerushin that doesn't have a date on it, we said it's a psul lechatchila. No?
Yes. So you asked an excellent question. I don't know the answer to that. And so, but clearly Rashi here is understanding that we are going to kill this woman. And so as a result, treat it as if she had an affair. And I guess that it could be that if it's, it'll be clear that the date was erased. And so we're just going to, the point is that if it may be a good divorce from this date on, or from any date that we know it exists on, but it won't be sufficient to save her if we're unsure about whether or not she had an affair before the divorce. So if we have witnesses that say that she had an affair, and the question is whether or not the get is valid, The question isn't only whether the get is valid. The question is also, was the get prior to her affair? And so we might say that it is a valid get from today on, or from whenever we can establish its existence on, but we will not say that that will save her, because indeed we'll now assume that she was in the chazakah of being married at the time. So yes, it might be a good get, but we need to show, in order for her to survive the charge of adultery, of illegal adultery, she is going to need to prove that the date of the adultery is after the date of the divorce. So that would be how we can understand that, yes, it is a valid b'di'evid divorce, but that's not the issue here. The issue isn't whether or not she's divorced right now. The issue is, was she divorced at the time of her affair? And since now the divorce does not have a date on it, we have to go with the understanding that she was in the chazakah situation that we thought she was in originally. The chazakah situation is that she was married, and so as a result, her status was married. She had an affair. She is punished. Okay. All right. So now tomorrow we're going to return to another case of three brothers, and we're going to discuss the case of what is known as double Zika. Double Zika, it's where basically, unfortunately, two brothers die in relatively quick succession, and we'll talk about that, God willing, tomorrow.
Thank you. See you, Rabbi. Have a good day.
Have a great day.
You too.